Hello, my name is Professor Richard Macrory and I convene the course on environmental regulation and governance. My background is that originally, when I was about 25, I was a lawyer for Friends of the Earth in London, dealing with a campaigning group, doing a lot of parliamentary work, doing public inquiries and so on. I then became a barrister and then gradually specialised in environmental law as an academic subject, and indeed became the first professor of environmental law in this country. I now practice as a barrister from Brick Court Chambers, doing occasional opinion work, sometimes getting involved in cases, but my main base is here at UCL, dealing and developing environmental law as an academic subject. The main aim of this course is to explore the various different legal techniques that can be used for coping with environmental protection. Which ones work, which ones don't work so well, and where are they likely to develop for the future. What we've done quite deliberately in the course is to use UK environmental law as a core theme. That's the key examples that we'll look at. And we've done that quite deliberately because UK environmental law is a reasonably well developed system. We started our environmental laws in the 19th century, but it's also faced many challenges in recent years, coping with new types of environmental problems, both international, European and national. So if you want to do a course just purely in UK environmental law, this is the one for you. But we're also, as I said, using this as an example. Many countries may have slightly different solutions, but they will be faced with similar problems. So for those of you who aren't familiar with UK environmental law, but who want to explore these different challenges, again, this course should suit you. We don't expect any previous knowledge of either UK law or any previous knowledge of environmental law. The UK is a member of the European Union, so European Union law will come up from time to time. But again, we don't expect any prior knowledge of that. We are starting from scratch, as you were. The course is split into a number of sessions. And the first one really concerns the structure of government departments. How should we deal with the environment? Do you split it into different areas? Do you try and have a single government department? Again, we'll use the UK as an example. And over the last 30 years or so, we've gone through many changes in our government departments. And personally, myself, I don't think they're at all right at the moment, and we'll use this as a critical stance and explore what other countries do in this area. We then move on to land use planning and environmental assessment, an extremely important area in the environment, because here one tries to anticipate problems before they turn up by sensibly planning how we use and develop land. So, for instance, if you site new housing development near an existing factory, you're almost certain to get pollution problems. And if you don't, then you won't. And we'll explore again how successful that is. We then look at a number of what I call sectoral areas, water and waste, where again we have a long history of environmental laws, often using fairly traditional techniques, but raising legal challenges in their own right. We then move on to a whole other area, the protection of natural habitats and biodiversity. Here again we see new techniques emerging, particularly in dealing with farmers who used to be thought as the protectors of the countryside, now with intensive farming giving rise to a lot more pollution, but have to be handled often in a very different way from a conventional industry. We then move on to consider new ways of dealing with environmental regulation, climate change, emissions trading, where instead of having traditional forms of licensing and consents and so on, we're trying to use the power of the market, economic instruments, to allow people to trade in permits and hopefully have a more efficient solution at the end of the day. Again, we'll approach this with a critical stance and ask, is the current system working? And if it's not, why isn't it? We then move on to consider the whole area of civil liability, the principles of nuisance and negligence, and ask, well, what role do they have in environmental protection? If you use them extensively, would that actually persuade people to comply with environmental law, perhaps even more so than conventional regulation. And then the final two sessions are concerned with major institutional challenges. First of all, we look at the whole question of sanctions. What do you do when an individual or a company breaches environmental law? Do you take them to the criminal courts? Do you punish them with imprisonment or fines? But supposing a company is just simply careless, but makes some money out of that, do we really need to use the criminal law? Are there other ways of dealing with that? And I'll be looking particularly at developments in the UK. I was appointed by the Cabinet Office quite recently to look at our whole range of sanctions, came up with a whole string of recommendations which are gradually being implemented, not all of them, but most of them are, and we'll be looking at that in practice and asking how well does it work, and are there any pitfalls in that system, and what could other jurisdictions learn from this? And then our last session looks at the whole question of courts. In this country we've tended to use the ordinary courts for dealing with environmental law problems, whether it's criminal law or the civil courts or the administrative courts for dealing with judicial review or public law. But over the last 20 years there have been many calls for specialised environmental courts. Some countries have developed them, and very recently in this country, and again it's an area I've been heavily involved in, we have created a specialised environmental tribunal, only dealing with certain areas of environmental law and only dealing with certain functions. But we'll use this as an example and we'll try and evaluate what its role is and ask, should it be developed further?